Welcome back to Beneath the Branches, a podcast from the Adoption and Foster Care Clinic. We're so glad you're here with us, whether you're listening in the carpool line, on a walk, or hiding in the pantry for 5 quiet minutes. This space is for you. Today's episode is one that might just shift the way you see everything, your child's behavior, your role as a caregiver, and the expectations you carry. We're talking about regulation before expectation, and why behavior is often the language our kids use when they can't find the words. This episode is for every parent, but especially those of us in the adoption, foster, kinship, care constellation. If you've ever felt confused, triggered, or defeated by your child's outbursts, shutdowns, or seemingly manipulative behavior, this conversation is for you. We'll unpack what regulation really means, how trauma impacts the nervous system, and how we can begin to see beneath the behavior to the need. You'll hear real talk, practical tools, and some honest reflections on what it means to be the calm in someone else's storm, especially when your own storm is raging too. So take a deep breath. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to stay curious. Let's dive in.
Co-regulation is, I think, one of the things I found out probably about after becoming a parent, but still with young kids at home. And it transformed the way I understood and responded to my kids' behavior. And really, it's just basically the concept that before somebody can learn to regulate their own emotions, they have to do it with their attachment figure first. And it looks different depending on the kid and their set of needs, what they bring to the table. But it's being able to hold that. It starts really, I think the foundation for co-regulation happens in the womb. Mm-hmm. And that is when babies are hearing their mother's heartbeat, they're adjusting to like the sway of their walk, the sounds around them. And then you emulate that same thing. We find ourselves like shushing and bouncing our babies. And you're like, every baby wants a different rhythm, you know? So you're like, do they want to be swung back and forth or do they want to be bounced? And that is like that's where co-regulation starts, where you are entering into their discomfort and you are working with them to help bring peace and calm. And it starts in those early hours in the morning or all day long if you have a colicky baby, where you are bouncing and shushing and doing that dance with them. And that transfers to bigger behavior that we see in toddlers of just like total temper tantrums, emotions out of the roof, where you enter into that discomfort with them and you sit with them until you help them find calm. And you do it with them, and then eventually those skills mature to where they're able to access that ability on their own and to regulate their own hard feelings. Mm-hmm. But it first comes from doing that with somebody who is safe and connected and an attachment figure.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you said is really important, like maturity, and maturity in the child's ability to be able to do that happens at different times for different kiddos. Mm-hmm. And, you know, for our kids, most of them have had disruptions in that co-regulation cycle that you talked about, you know? Yep. So whether it is a child who was adopted as a newborn, like still that is a disruption. That child was taken from the rhythm and the voices that they're aware of or that they knew, you know, and so much so for children in foster care or children who were adopted at older ages, like those cycles were disrupted. And so that is a huge reason why we have to go back and do some of that co-regulation with them at whatever stage they come to us in.
6, 7 years old, having to like repeat co-regulation phases where you hold and rock and soothe and kind of relay that foundation that was disrupted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think with our kids, oftentimes too, behavior modulation is controlled by your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex. Mm-hmm. So your limbic system is, you know, your amygdala, your hippocampus, and those are the things that that give you that immediate response. Mm-hmm. And so many of our kids have lived in that kind of immediate response being fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. That they're not able to mature into allowing their prefrontal cortex to take over, which is the part that inhibits emotion or regulates or helps you to kind of your thinking brain and your learning brain of how to readjust and go, oh, how do I really feel about the situation? Am I overreacting? You know? So our kids get stuck in their limbic system. It's like they can feel all of the emotions and they have the ability to feel all these rich emotions, but they have no brakes. They have faulty brakes. They can't put the brakes on those emotions. And so a lot of co-regulating is teaching. How do we use the brakes on these emotions so that we can process them more slowly? We can think through them more slowly. Yeah. So there's a biological reason why our children struggle more with self-regulation, that we have to go backwards and literally retrain the brain, literally change brain processes. And I think that's what gets so frustrating with adoptive and foster care parents, is it takes a lot of time to change the structure of the brain. That's what we're doing. Repeated incidences that change the structure of the brain through co-regulation.
Yeah.
And I think so often, we have this talk, this education piece with parents so many times, whether it's in the counseling room or at clinic, of our kids are complex, right? And it's not just their chronological age. Like, we have to look at the child as a whole. Like, what is their physical age? What is their chronological age, emotional age, social age, developmental age? Because, when we're looking at a child and their ability to co-regulate, we can't base that off of their chronological age because of what you just said. A lot of our kids get stuck, so when we're thinking about expectations for our children, we've got to look at what their emotional age is versus their chronological age, or we're doing them a disservice and we're going to drive ourselves crazy,
Yeah, I always try to tell parents, like, you have to parent the child that's in front of you, not the child that you think should be in front of you. Like, if your child is acting like a 3-year-old having a toddler temper tantrum, you have to respond in kind. You can't respond like they're a 7 or 8-year-old. They need, like, co-regulation. They need you to enter into that space because they're unable. They're showing you that they're unable. And we always have the other conversation too, can't versus won't. A lot of our kids can't regulate. It's not that they won't regulate, it's that they can't. And so being able to distinguish that in the moment and respond appropriately to the child that you see in front of you, not to their cognitive or to their actual age.
And when you extrapolate that to older age, like say you have a 12-year-old who's doing this, I think the older they get, the harder it is to see them as a 2-year-old emotionally, or a 3-year-old emotionally, when they're sitting there as a preteen or a teen. Right. It's very hard to do that. Yeah. And it can feel like giving in to the behaviors. It can feel like being permissive to go back and do the work of co-regulation.
And on the parent side, it just feels like they're being manipulative. I hate that word, but it just feels like manipulation,
It does, definitely. A physical example that someone told me once about what fully regulating a child, co-regulating a child, and the child being able to self-regulate was like how we teach kids to swim, right? So when you have...
I only say that because Edie's been in swim lessons, and she just used that can't versus won't on me yesterday. So it was timely. So sorry, go ahead.
I like it though.
Okay. So for example, like a baby, like a 1-year-old in the swimming pool, you're doing everything for that baby. We're not expecting them to be floating on their own, on their back, right? We're doing all of the swimming for them, the regulating. And then a toddler starts to learn to swim, a preschooler starts to learn to swim. They're still not on their own. They're constantly going, Mama, look at me. Mama, look at me. And you're looking at them, you're helping them, you're on the side, you're making sure that they don't drown. And then self-regulation is much more like a middle schooler or even elementary, where they're just swimming on their own. And you're just sitting back and watching, but they're swimming on their own, they're doing everything on their own. That helped me to kind of see, where am I in that pathway, and to think the brain is also that way. There's a physical progression from fully regulating, not being able to regulate anything, to self-regulation that we have to go through. Yeah. And I want to go back to what you said, Kelly, about it not responding to a child, not necessarily based on their chronological age, but on their emotional age. Let's talk more about that. Like, how do you know what your child's emotional age is? Say you have a 12-year-old. How do I know what their emotional age is and what age I should parent to?
Well, I think it kind of depends on. I want to say like it depends on a parent's experience, because because for a parent who's parented before, they may be more readily able to tell, but if not, that's something that we can help with. Like that's one of our jobs is to help like reframe behaviors for parents and help set expectations, so that's something that we readily do in clinic all the time. That's I think one of the magics as a team, because when a child comes in and we assess them in a very interdisciplinary way. Amy looks at developmental age and social age, and Caitlin looks at their emotional or social and social age. And so as a team, we can kind of tell parents like, okay, so chronologically they're 14, but what I'm seeing is emotionally they're acting and what you're telling me is more like a 4-year-old. Does that seem right to you? And of course we cross-check that with each other, with Amy also. But I think that that's kind of one of the things that we can help with at clinic, dependent upon like a family's need, for us to help with that.
And I think like knowing that emotional age is important so you can measure growth. It gives us a number to look at, but when you're in the moment and you're parenting, that actual age is not as important as just saying like, you have the inclination as a parent of like, whoa, this is younger kid behavior I'm seeing. And that's in the moment is all you need. And that means soften my tone, lower my body, and connect in a way that I would a younger child. Like in those intense moments, if you don't have access quickly to like, what age am I seeing? You just have to recognize I'm seeing a younger version of my kid right now, and they need a softer, different approach than what I'm providing.
And, even stopping yourself to think I'm seeing a younger version of my child, that is hard to do. It also feels permissive, right? It feels very permissive. It feels like bad parenting to go, oh, I'm letting them off the hook.
Right, but you're not. And I think that's where I think we find this a lot with parents is that gentle, connected, like co-regulation is not the relinquishing of boundaries. Like you don't give up the boundary, you change the support you're providing. So if you've said, you've got to put these shoes on and your big kid is throwing a 4-year-old fit, you sit down with them and you wait until they're ready. You don't say, oh, fine, you can just go barefoot. Like that would be permissive. So you hold the boundary, but you do it in a way that sees them in the moment and provides a different level of support. So that is the difference, because it can feel, and it can get so tricky. I find this, like, I wrestle with this all the time as a parent. Like, when is this boundary too much or not? But it's just remembering, like, you don't necessarily relinquish the boundary. You change the way you support your child to meet that boundary.
And I think attunement is really important. Like that's where like being attuned to your kid comes in, because there's going to be some times you've got to be able to like read your child, because there's some times where you're going to push a little bit more, but there's some times where you can tell, again, an attuned parent can tell, hey, like my child is like really having a harder time right now, like I need to allow more time or provide more support. It's not I'm going to respond this way every single time all across the board. Like you've got to be able to adjust in the moment, which can be really, really difficult, Again, why it's so important that, as parents, we make sure that we're healthy to do that. We've got to do the work before we're able to like effectively do this, because it's really difficult.
I think attunement is so closely tied to, and these behaviors are tied to knowing your child's window of tolerance. And that's different for every kid. Some kids have a bigger window of tolerance and some kids have a smaller window of tolerance.
From moment to moment.
That's right. And so it's that attunement piece is being able to read, like, are we still within our window of tolerance, but we're just getting more irritated? Right. And this is a time where I can like push my child and I know they can make it. Or are they about to tip outside of that window of tolerance and now we've gone into like black zone, like where it is like no looking back. Right. So it's just that piece of attunement too, of knowing, like Kelly was saying, where you can and can't push your kiddo a little bit. Because that's, that is kids test. And that is like an appropriate part of growing up and testing boundaries and developing that like as a parent, like how your support shows up with your kid when they show up with different behaviors.
And we all get it wrong. We all get it wrong. There's always times where like I push too much and then we're in that zone and we're like, okay, well, there's no going back now. I'm just going to sit here with it.
So now we're stuck. And
now we're stuck. We're going to have to work through it, you know? So it's not perfect. No parent is perfect. We all mess up.
And I think too, like when we mess up, usually it's because we've gotten triggered during or we've overestimated their abilities. So then we get angrier and angrier, and we're not able to let our child borrow our calm because there ain't no calm and what's that within us. Do you know what I mean? And that's a mess up. And then that often escalates to us wishing we hadn't have said certain things to our child. But that also is a learning opportunity. Like, children don't learn how to apologize without seeing a parent apologize to them. So I used to do that all the time. I blew it. And then I'd remember, oh yeah, this is an opportunity for teaching. I just need to model an appropriate apology so that my child will learn how to apologize. And that's hard and humbling to do.
Yeah. Repair is so important.
Maybe we could walk through a scenario. So kind of what goes on in your mind that might be helpful. Say your child has done something they repeatedly do, you know. So say they've talked back or been sassy or disrespectful.
Really big trigger for a lot of parents.
You know, kind of what we do when we're trying to co-regulate. Like, I think, for example, the first step is to just notice your own physical reaction. Like, okay, wait, what am I feeling right now?
And I think some of that is debunking too, because it's noticing our own physical reaction, but also realizing that as we are feeling more dysregulated in ourselves as parents, usually that comes from fear. You know, it's fear of, I'm not a good parent. You know, my kid would not be disrespecting me like this if I were a good parent, or we don't have connection, or fear of the future. Like, if I don't get this in check, then my kid is X, Y, and Z. You know, like we as parents can go through like these like dark spirals.
And extrapolate what the behavior is going to look like next year, you know, or they're going to be in jail.
Right. Or what people are going to think of us as parents, you know. Like if we're out, oh my gosh, like this happens all the time for me too, you know. Like where we're out and about and my kid is really dysregulated, you know. Like it's constant of, okay, I'm going to check myself, but also like I'm going to check all the fears, all the lies that are being said in my head, you know. Like everybody is looking at this. Everybody's going to think I'm a bad parent, you know. All of those things have to be debunked for yourself. Like, and it's in an instant, you know. You have to realize how you're feeling and what you're thinking to be able to regulate yourself so that you can help co-regulate your child. So I think that's one thing. Like those are the first couple of steps.
You know, just let's walk through the steps of when your child is very dysregulated, and of course, when your child's dysregulated, you're at risk for becoming dysregulated too. So maybe we could just talk through, like, what are the steps we take in that moment, and it'll be different for a little kid versus a teen as well. But maybe we can talk through some general principles. I know my first one is to notice my own physical reactions, like what am I feeling in response to my child's say disrespect, you know, or emotional volatility, you know, like is my heart beating faster? Is my tone changing? Am I tensing up everywhere?
Noticing your own body attunement.
And mine along the same lines is going to be like just trying to notice like what lies I'm telling myself, you know, in the moment, you know, like am I saying like I'm a bad parent? Look, I can't, you know, control my child, so I'm a bad parent. What's everybody else thinking of me? Like fears of the future, you know, like does this mean my child is going to X, Y, and Z? Like what's this mean? You know, is my child going to be okay? Like all those bad mom, bad parent fears.
If you're in public.
Right. Yeah. So I think that is one thing that I really try to do is stop and notice like what lies are there.
And then I think one way I can usually break that is take a deep breath. You know, people always say that, and it sounds almost cliche, but it actually biologically works, to take a deep breath, to kind of reset yourself. There's all these breathing exercises you can do. And I can usually just get like 1 or 2 deep breaths in before that's all I can really think about at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like some of our like responses to these things feel very reflective of our own selves, that like fears and worries, worst possible outcomes feels very reflective of like an Enneagram 6, and like for me, I'm like, is this a challenge? Like, let me just show you how I can respond, like I've been
Enneagram
waiting.
8 for anybody who's wondering.
Yes, yeah. So I have to try and give myself like a rehearsed, scripted answer because I can't trust myself. And sometimes I surprise myself and I do really well. But again, I like a little bantery argument. I live for those things, but do I need to enter into that with my 12-year-old? Absolutely not. Because I will win, and that doesn't feel good, like that does not feel good.
Will you win?
I mean, yes, that's just because I'm petty, So like having a good script that gives me that moment of pause because I value my relationship with my child over the invitation to have a good spat. So, those things could be like, hey, that was kind of sharp how you said that. Could you try that again? Or sometimes I even say like, whoa, this is making me a little frustrated. I think I need a minute. You're not doing anything wrong. I need a minute. And just like having something that I rehearse and can quickly say to create that moment of pause so I can like kind of re-center myself on like, what is the goal here? The goal is to have a positive, healthy conversation with my kid. So,
and I think that is important what you just said, that, if as parents we are feeling really dysregulated, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to say, I am feeling X, Y, and Z. This is not about you. I am feeling X, Y, and Z, and I need a moment. Because that is teaching your child what to appropriately do if you are feeling dysregulated. So instead of pushing through, feeling like you have to do something right in the moment, it's okay if you're in that state to step away and regulate yourself for a second.
And anxious kids will hate that,
Yes.
An anxious kid will hate I need a pause before I can respond to this thing. And so I have found in my own parenting experience, the best thing to do is to say 5 minutes, like 5 minutes. Do you see the clock? It's 11 o'clock. At 11:05, I'll meet you right back here. Just giving some structure and some boundaries around that so they don't feel like their concern, their need, whatever's happening is just going to be lost, which can happen easily if you're parenting multiple kids or you've got a lot going on. That may be a very real experience that your child has been through. So setting that boundary.
And for an anxious kid, sometimes you have to even create more structure for that kid. I need 5 minutes. You can eat a snack. You can, watch 5 minutes of TV. You can do X, Y, and Z. Give them like a framework of something that they can do while you take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Which that, again, is something that feels permissive. Delaying punishments or delaying talking it through, those kinds of things feel like permissiveness. But again, like Caitlin mentioned, we're not changing the boundary. We're not changing the rule. We're just approaching that child differently so they can hear that boundary in a more effective way.
Exactly. And that's what we have to remember is that if our kids, if they get outside of that window of tolerance, they're not learning anyways. So nothing that we can do is going to be effective anyways. So honestly, it's the opposite of permissive whenever you take a break and allow a child to regulate before you teach them or before you correct them, because if not, you're wasting your time,
Talk a little bit about what window of tolerance is for people that don't know what that is. And I like what you said about it's the opposite of permissive. So maybe expound. I'm sorry I asked you to, but expound on window of tolerance first.
Yeah. So when I'm explaining, I usually draw it out for my clients. But your window of tolerance, so let's just say all right, let's just picture a window, right? Like a cracked open window. So below the open part, that's going to be
Hypoarousal.
Yeah, hypoarousal. And
which is, I'll define, because sometimes I need it, is like tired, lethargic. So even that can be like tired, sleepy, bored behavior can be less than optimal conditions and outside of your child or your window of tolerance.
Right. And then you're going to have a gap right here of the open window, and then above that is going to be hyperarousal. So those are going to be like the opposite of those behaviors. And then right in the middle is kind of like the sweet spot. Like that is where you want your kids to stay when we're talking about regulation. So honestly, window of tolerance is just like a picture that you can paint for people that helps explain your child's dysregulatory process.
And it's not, that window of tolerance is not perfect behavior.
Right.
Like it's not complete regulation.
Right.
It is their ability to contain negative emotions in a positive way that where they don't totally lose control,
Right.
or they don't totally slip into like sleepiness or depression, so like you can be within your window of tolerance and be annoyed or aggravated, but you're able to tolerate that emotion and come back to a more elevated state.
Right.
So it's like a healthy experience of emotion.
Right.
I would say even in your window of tolerance, you're able to process and think through your emotions.
Yes.
You're not just reactive. You're not just in that limbic system and fight, flight, or freeze or fawn. You're able to process emotions, which maybe goes back to the fact what you said, Kelly, of it's actually the opposite of permissiveness, because we really have to get them back into that window of tolerance in order for them to really understand why we set that boundary, how we're going to accomplish that boundary together, as parent-child. And so it's more holding them accountable. Because their other window of tolerance, they're not hearing you anyway.
Right. And I think for our kids, like at their core, you have all these big behaviors, right? But at their core, a connected kid wants to please.
Yes.
Like that's what they want. That's what they desire. So when you're seeing a kid who is pushing against that, then that tells us a story. That tells us something that's happening within them that we need to step in and help them get back to kind of who they are at their core. So, and to be honest, I don't know about y'all's experience, but for the kids that I see, and honestly my own kids, when they step out of their window of tolerance, it's usually looking like hyperarousal. I don't see a ton of hypoarousal kiddos, but I don't know about you guys.
I mean, I see some of my own home with like lack of structure for my like hypersensitive kiddo. Lack of structure can create lethargic, bored, whiny behavior. And that is outside of our window of tolerance. And like, whiny behavior, this is like another, just knowing yourself, whiny behavior was not tolerated in my home growing up. Whiny behavior is very triggering for me. But like just recognizing like this is a sign my kid is missing something they need to be pulled into their window of tolerance. So at home I see that. I think most of our kids here, I think often parents are coming in and seeking help because kids stay hyper aroused too often, because we are seeing more aggression, anger, outbursts, impulsivity, and that's a lot harder to tolerate, I think, than whiny, bored.
And I think that's a great point, because I do think a lot of hypoarousal is missed.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
But I think too, you can be hyper aroused and not be an externalizer where you're yelling and things like that. You can still internalize where you're too complacent, too anxious. You're just more kind of hyper vigilant, darty eyes. You're shut down in that way, but you're still hyper aroused. Those kids are harder because they
That's
freeze.
Masking. And we like when we talk about the definition of masking, and kids who on the surface look much better than they are internally.
Yes.
That's, those kids are so tricky.
The whole concept of like learning if your kid's an internalizer or an externalizer, right? Yeah, with their behaviors.
So we talked about, that immediate response, but other things that I think are helpful kind of after you finish that immediate response is just getting down on your child's level, getting down to where you're not towering over them, these kind of body things that we do, or looking them in the eye if that's something that is, so of course our kids with autism, that can be a little bit more uncomfortable, but otherwise, looking them in the eye typically is a way to connect. And I would say, for me, the biggest mode for my children was tone of voice and facial expression. So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that, because to me that made all the difference in the world was my facial expression and my tone of voice.
Yeah. Well, and I always tell parents, engage as many of the senses as you can in a safe way. You know your kid the best, like you said. Like some of our kids, especially if they feel like they're getting in trouble, eye contact is hard. So you're going to try to elicit eye contact, but you're not going to force them to look you in the eye, and then like safe touch. That's one of the big one for my kids that really helps. And you got to be careful because you got to read your kid well, but like a gentle touch on the back or like a rub on the back or holding their little hands. And again, it can't be out of anger. That's why we have to go back and make sure that we're regulated, because there's a fine line between like, a gentle touch and like a more like aggressive touch, So again, that's why those steps that we talked about regulating ourselves first is so important, because you can't do these things effectively and well if you're not regulated, but engaging as many of the senses as you can.
Yeah, I have at least for like initial point of like reconnecting. So say you've taken a pause and you're coming back to circle back with your kid. If it's a kiddo who struggles with eye contact, because I think even outside of kids who have autism, kids who struggle with shame or are just like hypersensitive in general, eye contact in that first moment of reconnection is really difficult. So I'll say, if you can't give me eyes, can you give me your hand? And then so just for a second, even if they can't maintain that, like if they don't want to sit and hold their hand, it's just for a second they put their hand on yours, just as like a physical point of connection, like we're here together, and then they may pull it away, but just that like initial like, hey, I'm here. If you can't look at me right now and give me eyes, could you just give me your hand? And then kind of move from there, because it just creates like a gentle, like we're partners, it's like an invitation, and then kind of moving forward from there.
And physiologically, it releases oxytocin, which is a touch does that, which is a connecting hormone, and makes the child feel more connected to you if done in the right way, and if they're ready for it.
And some kids, what I'll say too is like, if they'll allow it, pull them into your lap. And a lot of times they like back to chest because they're not having to like stare you in the face during this hard conversation, So you can pull them into your lap and you can squeeze them or like hold them tight, whatever their body needs while you kind of talk about what happened, So again, though, parents know their kids the best. So they've got to kind of use the tools that they feel like is going to be the most helpful.
I think whatever that moment of connection, I think what is really powerful in all of that, the main message is connect first before you re-begin that conversation,
Right.
Like knowing your kid, what they can tolerate, what they like, whatever that form of connection is, we connect first, then we revisit.
And that can be like, oh, thank you for letting mom have a break. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this feels like permissiveness. It is like connection is not the opposite of correction. It is a tool for correction. So sometimes I think, depending on the ways we were brought up, it can feel like, oh, I'm letting them off easy by not letting them know how disappointed I am in that behavior. Which also sends the message, I'm disappointed in you. You know what I mean? So that's that point I find a lot of parents really struggle with of, gosh, that feels permissive. I'm just letting them off the hook. But what they're confusing, they're using a disruption of connection to correct, and that's just not going to get us anywhere. And another thing with I think my tone of voice and facial expressions are so important, is that kids with a history of developmental trauma will, even a neutral face or a neutral tone is interpreted as negative. And so we have to work harder at that, which is so exhausting. But to work harder at soft eyes, a gentle, not a smile like I'm laughing at you, but a gentle kind of,
Practice in the mirror.
I know, and don't look like,
and make sure my tone is
don't
nice
look nuts,
and
like,
light.
like terrifying.
Yeah. Right. And that's hard to do. You can feel like, oh, I've got a perma smile on, but it just goes so far. To check that tone and kind of overcompensate with that tone and those soft eyes and facial expression.
And even kiddos too who haven't experienced necessarily like complex developmental trauma, who may have some neurodiversities, like that is really important for them too.
That's true.
It's so true. Like a neutral face does not work.
No,
you've got to
it doesn't. Especially even if your words are like, "Hey, everything's okay," and you look like totally neutral, it's going to be like, "Why does your face look like that?" Though? Oh my gosh.
Right. That's such a good point.
Because again, you're trying to employ mirror neurons, which we're learning so much more about. Is you're trying to, again, lend them your calm. And so you're modeling in your body what you're hoping to gain out of their body, and their mind and their emotions.
One of the things, too, that I honestly learned this through my own parenting journey is oftentimes when you want your kid to feel it, like to feel the impact of their bad choice, that is much more about your need of control than it is about your child really learning what the right thing to do is. And so, like, whenever I find myself having that struggle internally of like, no, they were just so rude to me and I want them to feel how bad that was, that is more about like my need for control over their situation. That is not a pathway for teaching them the right way to respond. And so when like going back to all of this, like how so much of it has to do with parents, how we lead the environment we set, how we lead the conversation. Our goal ultimately is to teach them behaviors that will help them be successful, loving, positive people in the world, not to like make them feel the pain, like that's more of control based. So just like having that a level of awareness when we talk about connection feels like permission, or being permissive. It's what is your like 1,000-foot goal? Like what is the big picture, and reminding yourself of that. I tell parents, like, do you want to punish your child or do you want to disciple them? There's a difference. Like, are you coming alongside of them to lovingly teach and guide them, or are you trying to punish them into submission and right choices? Like, there's two paths there. One gives you a loving, long-standing relationship with your child. One is fear-based and creates separation. And our kiddos that come from hard places, if you use that fear-based mentality, you're not going to get the benefit of closeness and relationship with them.
Right.
But you might get faster behavior change.
It's true, yeah.
Which makes it tempting.
It is so tempting.
But it's not good in the long run.
No.
That's what I was going to say is like one method changes behavior and behavior only. The other method changes like the heart, which also changes the behavior.
Yes. And that it's the longer road.
It's the harder road.
It's much harder to like partner with somebody and not try to correct and force them into rightness, like whatever. It's a longer road because you're teaching. Like, what is the number? It takes like, it's a ridiculous number, like 560 times.
Hundreds of repetitions.
Somebody can Google it. Yeah, hundreds of repetitions for a child to learn a new behavior, and you do that every time with connection, love, and that's where we get to a place where your child has a trusting relationship with you, not fear-based.
Which is such a marathon, like we mentioned. It doesn't happen fast. Right. And it also requires a lot of self-reflection, which is why you need that support as a parent when you're dealing with this, because you need that support, because you're going to be having to look into, why am I triggered? What is it that's making me respond this way every time? Are there things that I've never really explored and only I was brought up that I need to address why I can't co-regulate with my child? That's a lot of, we all have to do that work. We all have to do that work.
Yeah. We all have our stuff. And our kids will have their own stuff that we give them, like even when we do all these things, that is a part of the human experience,
It is.
But we try to do that as gently and with as much relationship and safety as possible.
Yeah. Another technique that we haven't mentioned is naming your child's emotion. So when they're in the middle of feeling really, really, really sad, really, really angry, frustrated, is naming that emotion for them. Yeah. Like, I see you're feeling really frustrated. And I think that does two things. Is one, validate their emotions. You're not validating the behavior. Right. You're validating the emotion. There's nothing wrong with the emotion. Right. But it also kind of teaches them how to name their behaviors, which is going to help in the long run.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
As well.
And even doing that for some of our kids can be tricky, because like I'm thinking some of our kids, like if you say, I see you're angry, they're going to be like, I'm not angry. And so like it can be tricky. Yes. I mean, I think that's a really important component, but it may look like, oh, I can tell mom is feeling angry right now. I am feeling angry, instead of like putting it on them. Or it could be like wondering, like, I wonder if you are feeling angry right now versus like, because I mean, even my own kiddos, like they could respond like that. So it can be tricky depending on the kid. But that is a really important component,
Yeah. And the age of the child too. I feel like you can name it a little bit easier without making them mad when they're younger.
Yes,
that's true.
So
and I
true.
think it's the most important to name it when they're younger,
Right.
instead of asking, because oftentimes they don't know and they don't have the words yet. And when we ask, like, are you feeling angry? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you annoyed? It's so dysregulating because, like, I don't know. So when a parent can contain it with words in the younger years, I think that does a good job to help regulate. When they're older and they have like a little bit more idea of how to name, once you've done that work, I think that's when wondering is really powerful, because it's like I'm kind of offering an invitation, but I'm giving you the opportunity to tell me I'm wrong, I'm not trying to say what your experience is. I'm cool. I'm just like noticing. It's different. It's a different dynamic depending on the age.
What about calming exercises in that moment? Like, things that we teach our kids to do to calm, like that can be dicey to bring up, but it also can be helpful.
Yeah.
All the different like breathing strategies or grounding strategies.
Oh my gosh. The best one that has worked so well with my kids from like ages like 5 to 9 probably has been cold water, and even younger, but like go get a sip of cold water. And that is like enough of a sensory change. I just can like see my kiddo and being like, hey, I think it's time for a cold sip. And then being like, okay, because they would know that it works, So even some of those immediate sensory changes are really helpful. And I think that can work for older kids too. But I just remember some of those like older years, you're still having temper tantrums and you probably shouldn't be. I feel like you shouldn't be, but you are. Cold water was a really good trick.
Well, maybe we can have another podcast on grounding techniques.
Yeah, there's so many. I feel like we could talk forever about it.
We could.
Yeah.
And I think too, in that moment though, whatever grounding technique you're using, like you don't have to, you can't always force it on your child. And if your child doesn't want to do it, then you can say, I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And you can go along with me or not, but I'm going to do it. Because then you're also, again, teaching them, like, moms need this too. Dads need this too, to have these grounding techniques. And you're still teaching, even if they're not participating.
It models vulnerability too. I think there's a certain level of vulnerability in being like, I'm feeling out of control and I need this. And so you're like telling them that that's okay to do. And for our kids who have not always had safety and security, vulnerability is so scary. So to see it modeled in such a healthy way, I think is really good.
Because that's going to teach your child more than telling your child. Like, modeling is the number one way our kids learn, is watching us do things, watching us do these behavior regulation techniques, watching us apologize when we've lost it. Watching us even use these techniques with other people in the family. So they're watching, they're not dysregulated, but they're watching us use it with brother or sister or husband.
Right.
So that's the best, most effective teaching tool for our kids.
For sure.
We're getting close to, time to wrap up, but I think we've brought up so many things that that we might want to talk about more in the future. We mentioned like grounding techniques and things like that. Or if people have questions from this episode, it'd be a great time to ask questions of us, and we could go deeper to do like a part 2 of this podcast later as well. So, well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for joining the Adoption and Foster Care Clinic for another episode of Beneath the Branches, a podcast for adoptive, foster, and kinship care families. We are deeply grateful to our sponsor, Show Hope, for their generous support and their continued work to break down barriers to adoption and support families every step of the way. Until next time, may you feel covered, connected, and never alone beneath the branches.